I wanted to talk today about moving from surviving to thriving in remote hybrid math instruction. And as I said, as Eric said, my name is Cynthia Bell. I am the Director of Workforce and Numeracy Services at the Literacy Assistance Center. For those of you who are not aware, the LAC is a nonprofit professional development organization that does PD around adult education and workforce development for adult educators and practitioners. So a little bit about me. I'm a wife and a mother of two. This is my family here. I have two daughters who, like a lot of our youth, did online learning last year, but thankfully they were able to go back to school in person this year. So my daughters were in school all year this year. And so I was thankful just to have them out of the house. That was a really good experience to get them back in school. I have a 6th grader and a 4th grader. And right now, my 6th grader is doing pretty much almost all of the math that I would have been teaching if I was still teaching HSC. They're working on functions and slope and all those other good things. So it's a good thing for me to still have that practice going aside from what I'm doing professionally. And I'm also a numeracy and mathematics subject matter expert. So that's my area of focus and expertise. But like most of us, I had to build up my digital literacy skills in 2020. So I'd like to say I'm pretty proficient in that regard when it comes to instruction online. So we're gonna actually talk a little bit about how to make those transitions from just survival to now thriving. And also, for those of us who are about to start moving to hybrid. I typically don't do like an about me kind of thing when I do a workshop. Those of you who've seen me do workshops, it's rare that I do that. I kind of just dive right in, but I figured give you all a chance to get to know me a little bit so that way we can have an open conversation. I did teach in the field full-time for about 8 years for adult education as well as disconnected youth. That's the term that it was at that time, as well as at an alternative high school. But altogether, I've been in the field for about 13 plus years. Okay, so enough of that. So interactivity is key. I actually kind of want to start here, right? Like I want to do an icebreaker, but I'm actually even about to start to introduce one of the points for the talk today. So we're going to be speaking about making the transition from surviving. A lot of us were just trying to survive teaching online and hybrid to now how do we thrive being able to teach online and how to transition to being in person again, because some of us our programs are at that place where we're trying to decide, are we going to be in person? If so, how much, how long, to what extent? So we're going to start by talking about that transition. And one of the most important practices for teaching online is interactivity. Interactivity is key. And this practice is just as necessary for in-person instruction as well, especially when it comes to math instruction. So in essence, whether you're teaching online or in person, this is one of the main best practices that we know of, and that's making sure that you have interactivity, especially when we're talking about math. A lot of times, the way that literacy is taught tends to be really engaging and promoting of conversations and critical thinking and those kinds of things. And then unfortunately, when we transition to teaching math or numeracy, it turns very much into I have all the information and you learn exactly how to do it the way that I'm telling you how to do it. So interactivity is key is definitely one of the practices that I want us to look at today when we talk about transitioning from online to in person and transitioning from being in survival mode to thriving mode and whatever method of delivery our instruction is in. So we're actually going to do some interaction, which is why I put that one there in the first place, right? Like you're going right into the practices because we're actually going to do a little bit of interactivity. So I wanted to just bring to everybody's attention, one of the first best practices for online teaching is interactivity. So if you have your smart device, I would recommend that that's probably the faster way to do it. But if it's not, if you want to just open another tab aside from our Zoom, you can do that as well. So you got a couple of ways that you're going to access our Menti. I have a Mentimeter poll kind of interactive slide thing that we're going to do here. So if you take a moment, I'll actually even grab the link myself and put it in the chat box for those of you who want to click on it on your laptop. But you can scan the QR code if you're going to use your phone. Or if you're going to just go to the browser, go to menti.com and then put in this code here. It says 32907749. I'm going to drop it in the chat box. If I can get my chat, there we go. I wanted my chat to open. Just to make it easier for everybody. Okay, so I'm going to hop over there to our Menti. And some of you are already starting to vote. Okay, this is actually our icebreaker. Our icebreaker was, how are you feeling about teaching online or hybrid learning right now? You got A, B, C, or D. Gonna give everybody a moment to vote. I can't see how many people we have. I've got 3 screens open right now, so.
There's 89, Cynthia, there's 89 people here or 90 people here.
Okay, so we're not quite at 50% yet.
Yeah.
I'll give everybody a moment.
This is not only an icebreaker, but then it can turn into a classroom activity in a numeracy class with the percentages.
Yes, yes. Although I purposely used this one to not show the percentages but this tool is a really good way to have interactive engagement for presentations and in slides. So let's see. We're on 1 more minute. See how many more.
I like the real-time update, you know, because it makes it look like a horse race.
For sure. Let's see. Almost there.
We just lost your screen.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
Thank you though. Because I wanted to go back to my slide deck. And in case you didn't see the options, maybe you're on your phone and you couldn't really see the pictures. I wanted to just pull back up the pictures. The icebreaker was, how are you feeling about teaching online or hybrid learning? And here are your choices: A, B, C, or D. I particularly like using visuals and images when it comes to teaching math and numeracy. A lot of times learners, sometimes as well as us as teachers, we get stuck on that numeracy and math is only about numbers, is all about numbers. But it's more than just about the numbers. So one of the practices that I like to do is try to give scenarios, tasks, problems, situations that don't even have numbers, right? Because I want people to think. I want people to take the time to actually look at the information that's being given there. And this method of delivery for this icebreaker, this is actually an instructional routine for teaching math. It's called problem posing, right? So if you notice, what I did was I gave you the answers first, A, B, C, and D. And then if I was running this as an activity in a math class, I would ask my students, I would ask them, what do you think the question could be? Right? And they maybe answer with our Mentimeter, like how we did. They'd answer with our Mentimeter, but they throw out what they think the questions are based off the answers, right? So they're using context, they're using understanding, they're using connections, representations to try to think about what the problem might be. That's an instructional routine called problem posing. It really invites creative thinking in learners. It works well in literacy as well, but I like to use it for numeracy. It's actually a really good instructional routine. So I kind of wanted to just throw that out there here, although my Mentimeter gave away the question ahead of time. We would see the answers here. We have A, B, C, D, and then problem posing is think about what the question is. And the question that I was asking you all was, how are you feeling about teaching online or hybrid learning currently? So let's go back to our Mentimeter and see what the results are here. Got 22 A's. Oh, we only have, I'm surprised the D is that low. I'm surprised the D is that low, but I'm glad to see that the D is that low. Sometimes when I run this particular icebreaker, I find that the closer to the end of the week, the more D's I have, right? The closer to the beginning of the week, the more like A's I have. And right now we're at the midpoint, I guess. We're at the midpoint in our week Wednesday. So the numbers are a little bit all over the place. We could do a little bit of data analysis about that, but we won't get into that right now. But I'm glad to see that most of you are feeling, that you empowered or thoughtful, or, that you feel like you're making progress in how you're teaching online. Okay, so we're gonna go back to our slide. There we go. So teaching math ain't easy. Those of us who teach math, you can give me a thumbs up or type yes in your chat box if you actually are someone who's actively teaching math, whether it's at the ABE level, the pre-HSC level, or the HSC level. If you're actively teaching math, you can type yes in the chat box or give me a thumbs up. I'm curious to see how many like actual teachers we have versus those of us who are administrators or coordinators, etc. Let me check out that chat box, see how many have. I got a couple of yeses, yes, 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 no, thumbs up. Ooh, someone threw me a thumbs up emoji. I like it. Yes. Okay. So we've got a pretty good amount of people here who are teaching math. That's good. So teaching math is a rewarding and sometimes challenging endeavor when it was in person, right? And it got a little bit more challenging when we had to move online. And the shift to teaching online may have made it even more challenging for some of us. We may have had to learn a few methods of, we may have learned a few methods of teaching when it came to survival, right? In 2020, we found one or two things that really worked for us. We got a little bit of success. And we're like, great, I can do that, right? But now that we have been doing it for about 15 or 16 months, now is the time for us to use the opportunities that we started to develop for teaching online and take those opportunities and now thrive with them. So for example, if you learned how to use a really good tool, there's a really good tool I'm going to talk about in my workshop tomorrow called Desmos. And Desmos was actually being used by the K through 12 world in person before COVID was even a thing. Adult education, we weren't using it nearly as much as we should have and as effectively. But since we moved online, a lot of adult ed teachers started to recognize that this is a great tool to use, and it was helping with distance learning. And now when we make our shift back to in person, we shouldn't just leave Desmos on our computers at home while we were working from home. We should take Desmos with us to our classroom. This is what I'm talking about as far as seeing the opportunities, the things that we saw, that we learned, that we're like, yes, this works. We should make sure that we take those things back with us when we go in person. Or if we're continuing to teach online, how do we build on those tools? How do we build on those instructional routines? How do we continue to make those things better so that we're no longer just in survival mode, but that we are now thriving using the methodologies and the teaching strategies and the tools that we started to use and that we learned in 2020 and now the first quarter of 2021. So I want to play a short video here because I like to break it up too. This is also one of the best practices for teaching online, which we're going to cover a little bit tomorrow if you attend that workshop. And I'll go through all three of them again today, but another one of them is striving for presence, right? Different ways for people to feel connected with you, with your content, and with each other. So I like to use different forms of delivery, not just me talking, engagement, not just all visuals, because we have different kinds of learners as well. But I do want to play this video because I saw this video for the first time at COABE and it really moved me. And every time I watch it, not only does it move me, but it's like a reminder right there for me as far as what kind of teacher I need to be, what kind of teacher I want to be, especially when it comes to the online learning environment for our students. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen because I want to double, triple check to make sure that I have it optimized for video, even though I'm pretty sure that I did. There we go. And then I'm going to play this video. It's a really short video.
I'm a student. This is my routine. Every morning, I get up. I make my way to school. I come here for an education. Seeking knowledge. This is what I find. Day after day. This is all I find. Day after day. This is what I find. If you wouldn't neglect me in a classroom with desks and a chalkboard, why would you do it to me in a classroom with a keyboard and a screen? Am I paying tuition for a bunch of notes on a board? Education and teaching is more than a few reading assignments. It's time for a change.
Okay. This video was actually made by a student. As I said, for me, it's a reminder literally every time I see it, right? I know that the instruction that I deliver and that a lot of the teachers that I work with deliver is not on that level, right? We do synchronous instruction. We have Zoom classes, we talk to students, etc. But is it engaging enough? Is it collaborative enough? Is it optimized enough? Because this video, the title of this video is actually called A Student's Perception of Online Learning, right? What our students perceive is happening, right? If we're seeing numbers go down in our programs, sometimes we have to look back, we have to look and reflect at, okay, well, what is it that the students are getting out of the class? How is it that the students are seeing the instruction that's being provided in the class? Particularly, unfortunately, around math, because just like the last slide I said, teaching math is already challenging, right? There's already a lot of barriers there. Oh, I don't want to. Oh, we're going to do, right? So for me to just go online and say, I put up my online whiteboard and say, okay, today I'm going to teach functions, and everyone on the other side of the screen, watch me teach you about functions. And then I upload on my Google Classroom the worksheet that you're going to do. That's kind of the equivalent of this video here, right? The way that I would have taught in person, which was with meaningful, engaging tasks and collaborative group work and opportunities for students to think about other students thinking, all of that richness, I need to make sure that it's there online. And that's how I'm going to move from surviving to thriving, because yes, we might not have been in the position to be able to do that when we first started. Because a lot of us, including myself, we were just trying to like get by, right? We were just trying to survive. Like, just teach me how to use Google Slides the right way. Or, okay, now I understand how to use this one thing, and then I'm going to run with it. But when we're online, when we're in person, we know we taught with different strategies. We taught with different routines. You might have done a number of the day. You might have done a notice and wonder, right? A lot of those rich instructional routines that you did in person, they can definitely and should definitely be transferred when we're teaching online or hybrid. That is how we start to make that shift from surviving to thriving. So I want to be really concrete here on like three steps for making sure that you make the shift. So one, start with what's good and effective, right? Start with what you already know. What's good and effective instruction currently, whether it was in person or even whether you've mastered some things online. Then be intentional about your instruction and your lesson design. So what I mean by intentional, I mean now actually start to really think about how you're designing your lesson. Are you engaging in multiple modalities? Which I'm going to cover that in our session tomorrow. What I mean by multiple modalities or of representation, meaning the way that your content is being delivered. Are you delivering it in multiple ways? If it's all just text, that's not multiple modalities, right? You got to have some video, you got to have some audio, you got to have some tactile. Cynthia, you can do tactile online? Yes. Are you giving your students chances to drag and drop things, to use virtual manipulatives? Are you doing opportunities for them to get up out of their seats to go find things in their home and bring those things to the table, to the camera, for them to measure things, for them to calculate the area of things, those kinds of things? That's what I'm talking about as far as being varied in your representation, how your content is being delivered, as well as being varied in how they can engage with your content. I spent a lot of time observing teachers online this year. I observed teachers probably 4 or 5 times a month. And when we first started, one thing that I noticed across the board was the way that the math instruction was delivered and the way that it was assessed was the same. It was the same in every class. And what do I mean by assessed? No matter what it was that the teacher was covering, the way that they assessed if the students understood it was for them to just say, do you get it? Does anybody have any questions? If you get it, unmute yourself and tell me that you don't understand. That's only one way of engaging and assessing them. What if I'm not comfortable unmuting myself? What if I'm not able to type it into the chat box, right? That's what we're talking about, different ways for students to engage and different ways for you to represent, which I'm going to cover that tomorrow when we're talking about multi-level. But that's where I'm coming from with the second point about being intentional about your instruction and your lesson design. When you start to be intentional about making sure you have multiple modalities for engagement, multiple modalities of representation, now you're starting to make that shift. So step one, to make the shift, start with what's good and effective. The thing that you are already doing that you know was working, when it's good, give you good results, it's good mathematics instruction, it involves best practices, start with that. Then be intentional about how you design your lessons and your instruction. And then the third step is then keep growing and keep getting good at that stuff. Never stop and say, oh, well, I've mastered Google Slides, right? I've mastered Google Forms. I've mastered Google Docs. Keep growing. Great, you've gotten really good at it. Now think about how you can take Google Slides to the next level, right? How can you do even more with Google Slides when it comes to the instruction that you're providing? And I know this is a numeracy talk, but I was being general and specific in case in case we had people who taught all the subjects. These shifts work whether you're teaching math or literacy, right? We're talking about just good instruction in general. So I wanted to share some best practices. These are actually based off research. I cited the source down there for you. I think my screen sharing thing is in the way, but I will make sure that you have access to the source, because there was a lot of really good online teaching happening before COVID hit, right? People were teaching online before COVID hit. There was a lot of research that was done around what is effective online instruction. And so I spent a lot of time researching all of the data and research that was out there. And my job is to synthesize that information and to give it back to teachers. So we synthesized it down to these 3 best practices for teaching online. And they work really well as far as, if you think about it, best practices for teaching math in general. Because effective teaching and learning for math shouldn't change whether I'm teaching online or whether I'm teaching in person. So here are the 3 practices. We actually already looked at one of them. And the first one is strive for presence. That's kind of like that video there. There was no presence there. There was no presence. And there are actually 3 different kinds of presences. You want social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go into all 3 of those, but if you want to learn more about it, again, you can access the research here. But you want to strive for presence. And if you're noticing a little bit today, I'm actually kind of even doing that with my presentation, right? My little Bitmoji here, that's an attempt at presence. I use different GIFs, I use different memes because I want people to feel connected to me, right? Even down to the images that I pick. I want people to feel connected to me, striving for presence. So it's not just this blank screen, whether I'm doing synchronous or asynchronous learning. And then the same thing for students, giving them the chance for them to have presence with each other. The second practice is interactivity is key, right? And that was actually the first thing I introduced. Interactivity is key. So making sure that you give students a chance to interact with you, as well as with each other, as well as with your content. And then the third thing is let students do the work. I feel like this one is the one that's the most challenging for those of us who teach math. I know some of us subscribe to, and it definitely has its place in time in math instruction, the I do, we do, you do model, which is called gradual release of responsibility and instruction. But unfortunately, sometimes with that model, we don't really do this. Let students do the work. One of the models that I've really been trying to live by this last year when it comes to teaching online, it's something that a grad school professor said to me years ago, which was never say anything that the students can say themselves. Never say anything that the students can say themselves. And especially when I'm teaching math, a lot of times I feel like, oh, it's my job to tell them how to solve the problem. A best practice is let the students do the work. Let them do the thinking. Yes, you can help, but there's a difference between helping and putting them on my path, the way that I think about it. Even down to vocabulary, right? Why do I have to tell them the definition of a slope? They can figure out the definition of the slope. My job is to give them the chance to figure that out, because then their understanding is a lot more concretized than me just saying, oh, slope is the constant rate of change. And it's the change in Y compared to the change in X. You all are math teachers. I just said that. I'm sure for half of you, that's already gone in and out of your head. Like, wait, what? I thought slope was rise over run. That's because that was concretized for you, right? So these are our three practices here. Strive for presence, interactivity is key, and let the students do the work. So we're going to do a little bit more interactivity because I just talked for like 10 minutes and it makes me feel really uncomfortable. Okay, because again, multiple modalities. So I'm going to ask if you have your devices to go back to your Mentimeter in a second. So this is kind of like the heads up that we're going back to the Mentimeter. I haven't activated the slide yet. So if you go there and you still see the icebreaker, don't panic. Just want to make sure everybody's with us. But I want you to have a moment to think about, how do you practice? Those of you who are practitioners, those of you who are directors, and you have teachers that you supervise, let's take a moment to think about, how do we practice, whether we're teaching online, hybrid, or in person. So if you just joined us, I'm going to just put back up the Mentimeter slide. The information not here. I need to go to the other slide. For you to think about your practices. It's this one. So scan the QR code if you need to go back to it. If you don't, I'm going to jump over there now to move us to the next slide. I need this to go away so that I can see. There we go. And I would like for you to think about this question here, and you please respond. Besides having synchronous instruction, how do you strive for presence when teaching math online? Okay, so you can type in your answer. I'll give everybody a moment to think about it and to type in your answers. And as you do, it should generate and show up. The code is still here at the top in case you didn't see it. It's 32907749. And I know that, we engage in synchronous instruction. That's why I said besides synchronous instruction. How do you go about striving for presence when you teach math online? Or if you don't teach math, right? I see somebody said when you don't teach math, obviously this is a numeracy talk, but how do you strive for presence when you teach whatever it is that you teach? And Eric, if you can let me know what time I need to finish.
Yeah, I think if we're wrapping everything up by 2, that's good.
Gotcha. Okay. I wanted to make sure I leave time for questions.
Yep.
And one of the things I like about this tool, as Eric did point out, as you all can see on the screen, we've got live responses coming in. So interactivity is key. This gives people a chance to respond. There are lots of different tools you could use. We could have used the Padlet, that would have done the same thing. But I kind of see this as like, the equivalent in person if I were going to do chart paper, right? If I were going to do chart paper and students were writing on the chart paper, or if I were going to do individual whiteboards. A lot of times in person, I would use individual whiteboards where everybody would have their whiteboard and they'd write their responses on it, et cetera. I like to use these kinds of tools to give students a chance to do that. So I wanted to give you a chance to reflect on your practice. How do you strive for presence? Okay. And I'm noticing that I'm even in the answers necessary, I'm not seeing so much about you, right? The presence of connection. We all know a lot of times the reason a lot of our students kept coming and keep coming is that connection, right? Why they still come to your class even though it's not time for class, or why they still are hanging out in your classroom even though you dismissed them already, or why they just randomly drop by to come see you. It's because they want that connection. So that's kind of what I'm asking there, is for you to reflect on, how do you get your presence? How do you basically get to let them in, right? And I tried to model that a little bit even in my talk, right? That's why I said I had the first slide there that said a little bit about me. And normally I don't do that, right? I know I typically don't have a slide that says about me and a picture of my family, but there's like 80 of you on here. And I thought to myself, I'm like, they don't know me. Why would they even want to listen to anything that I have to say? It's just an empty screen, right? So I had to find some way to build a connection, to strive for presence. Normally when I'm in class or online or in person, I let the students in a little bit. Most of my students know I'm a big sports fan, because they see my GIFs, or they know that I like Star Wars because I'll use a GIF from Star Wars or what have you, right? And the same thing for them, right? Even just down to how they have their name on the Zoom meeting, right? A lot of them will sometimes add like emojis behind it or what have you, right? How do you strive for presence? Okay, so let's keep going. Next practice, because I want to be conscious of our time. What are some things that you do to encourage interactivity in your math instruction? So basically, I wanted us to reflect on our 3 practices. The first one was strive for presence. So I wanted you to get a chance to think about how you do that. And then our second practice is interactivity is key. So I would like for you to reflect and think for a moment. You can type it in. What are some things that you do to encourage interactivity in your math instruction? And for those of you who are not math teachers, you can just make it general as far as instruction in general. But those of us who do teach math, I would encourage you to think about how you're doing that with your math instruction. Because we really have to be intentional. Interactivity with us, interactivity with each other. And it's more than just, I do breakout rooms. Well, when they're in the breakout rooms, how do you still encourage the interactivity when they're in breakout rooms? Because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever been into a breakout room before, where I dropped in the breakout room and everyone in the room, their cameras were off and they were muted and nobody was talking to each other and nobody was doing anything. So how do you encourage interactivity when you teach math? I'm seeing some good answers come in, but I'm going to wait patiently, because that's one of the things I've learned about this tool, is that you have to give people a chance to type it in because they're typing, right?
Yeah, wait time online is like double wait time in person.
And it's one thing that I've learned that it seems to be hard for all of us. So when I really want to do wait time, I do the Jeopardy song in my head and all the way through. Like even down to the dun, 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 that thing, right? Because we feel like there's that radio silence and we're not allowed to have it, but it's okay.
Works for hand washing too.
That's what I've heard. What I've heard. Let's see. Oh, I'm seeing some good things there. Let students know that sometimes I make mistakes. Oh, yes. I love talking about mistakes and placing value on mistakes. Utilize real life applications. Make them keep the video on. Vote on answers. Dance parties. I like dance parties. Time the activity. I do breakout rooms and pop in each room to make sure that students are understanding. I like Kahoots too. Kahoots are fun, but I found that a lot of my teachers were using them a little too much. But again, that was, surviving, right? I found something that works. It's working, right? So then now how do we like move forward with the beauty that is Kahoot? All right, last question. Thank you all for interacting with me. Last one. How do you ensure that students do the work in your math instruction? So this is our third best practice. Let students do the work. So how do you ensure that the students do the work in your math instruction? I know this one may be hard. I always have to pull myself back from this too whenever I'm designing something, because sometimes I scaffold way too much. And I have to give myself a moment to think, wait a minute, these are adult learners. They can think. My job is to give them a chance to think, to give them opportunities to make connections. So how do you go about letting students do the work? I see, have them explain how they derived their answers. Those of you who have put in your answers, feel free to, scroll through and look at what other people are saying. That is a powerful part of learning. Anytime that I teach, I'm always looking for ways to promote thinking about other people's thinking, right? Number talks are a really good way to do that, to get people to think about other people's thinking. That's how you open up for conceptual understanding and deeper understanding of topics and content. You make sure students in the same household or in separate rooms. Ooh, that's interesting. I don't know if we've ever had that issue before. I'm sure we do. Maybe I do have some teachers who have students in the same household. I made them collect props related to vocabulary, work on the same sample problems, share strategies, Google Classroom before review, fun collaborative exercise. I like that. I tell them I'm tired of listening to me. I think that's pretty much what I said to them. Like I've done way too much talking and how they derive the answers. Okay, for time's sake, I'm going to move us on. But thank you for those of you who did interact and did participate. Let's go back to, so I did kind of briefly mention these again. I'm going to cover these tomorrow for those of you who do join us. But we're talking about moving from thriving to surviving. And one of those steps that I gave you was making sure that you're intentional in your design. So I just wanted to have a visual slide here that you could see what it was that I was explaining regarding the 3 principles for universal design for learning, right? The 3 principles for universal design for learning say you want to have multiple means of representation. You want to have multiple means of action and expression, and you want to have multiple means of engagement. I don't know how much engagement has been an issue in New Jersey, but whenever I would meet with program directors and or coordinators, the word that was like, if I had a nickel for every time I heard it, I would at least have a good $7,000 by now. And the word was engagement. How do we keep our students engaged? Our students aren't engaged. Our teachers aren't engaging. How do we engage our students? And engagement is one of the principles of universal design for learning, having multiple means of engagement. But engagement here is not maybe the verb that you're thinking about. Engagement here has to do with motivation. It has to do with motivating the student to want to learn for themselves and having multiple ways to go about doing that besides you can do it, right? Multiple ways that sparks the student to say, I want to learn this thing. I need to know this thing. One thing that I used to say to my students all the time was that I wanted them to be relentless in their pursuit of their understanding. I wanted them to go after what they wanted so hard. You be relentless in you understanding. So that means if you have to stop class to say, I don't understand, and ask questions about it, then do that, because this is about you and your learning and your understanding. So we're going to cover this a little bit more tomorrow. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear on, like, these are basically the concrete steps that I'm kind of sharing as far as how to make that shift from surviving to thriving. You want to think about what's good and effective. You want to be intentional with your design for your instruction, which incorporates universal design for learning. And then you want to just keep going. You want to keep growing. You want to keep challenging yourself as far as, how do I do this better? How do I make this better? And so a little bit, we're going to cover variability in our conversation tomorrow. We're going to see this video tomorrow. This is kind of me like plugging to get you to come back tomorrow. And so our last thing is keep learning and keep the good stuff, right? So what strategies and or tools can you keep when you return to the classroom? Because they can enhance your instruction. You had some really good things that came out of teaching online. What are the things that you can keep? Because they'll make the way you teach math better. What are some things that you can keep? Because they'll make the way that you teach literacy better. I know one thing personally that a lot of my teachers are saying that they're going to keep with them is Jamboard. I don't think I have one teacher who doesn't use Jamboard and who hasn't mastered how to use Jamboard now. And they're like, oh, wow, I'll totally keep Jamboard when I go back to the classroom. And or another one is we do visual vocab, right? Like to build student understanding of vocabulary. I have some teachers who do it in Google Slides, and they'll put like the word in the middle of the slide, and they'll have different things about that word, like, you know, what are antonyms for that word? And the students have to find antonyms for that word. And what are some images that represent the definition of this word? And the student will have to go online and look for images, etc. And they end up building like a visual vocabulary notebook in Google Slides. And I know I have some teachers who recognize the value in that, and they're going to use that when they go back to their classroom, because you can still do that in the classroom. Another tool that I would continue to use is Mentimeter, right? Like, it's online assessment right there. The Mentimeter is a powerful formative assessment tool. I get to know what you're thinking right now, because all you do is use your phone and press some buttons, and now I can see the numbers. That feedback is important for me for formative assessment. I know that I would definitely take that back when I start doing in-person trainings and when I start co-teaching in person again. So third thing, keep learning and keep the good stuff. Don't throw away the things that you had that were working. Continue to enhance and refine your practice as instructors. And don't throw away the technology. A lot of us were forced to use technology, but don't throw away the technology if you go back in person or hybrid. If you do these things, thriving is inevitable for you. Thriving is inevitable. So I'm going to stop there. And here's another attempt at me striving for presence. I love Doctor Who. This is the 13th Doctor. It's not necessarily me saying that 13th Doctor is my favorite Doctor, but this was the GIF that I could find where the Doctor was saying, does anybody have any questions? In an effort to strive for presence, if you are a Doctor Who fan, shout it out in the chat box for me if you're a Doctor Who fan, and tell me which Doctor is your favorite Doctor. I'll start it off. My favorite Doctor is the 10th Doctor, AKA David Tennant, although I do very much adore Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor as well. If you are a Doctor Who fan. If you're not a Doctor Who fan and you're like, what are you talking about? You can tell me that in the chat box too. And if you're not a Doctor Who fan, you should be, because it's a great show. I love that someone said Tom Baker, how Eric said Tom Baker is his favorite Doctor. Okay, so any questions? I'm pretty much done, Eric, so I don't know if you wanted to do the unmuting thing like you talked about, or if people want to type in the chat box, but I'm here to take any questions. Here's my information. If you wanted to email me, you can reach me at cynthiab@lacnyc.com,
All right, thanks so much, Cynthia. I mean, one of the first questions that came up was the video, that student made video. Is there a link to that?
Yes. What I will do is I'm going to send you, Eric, the link for the slide deck in general.
Okay,
And you can share that with people, because again, I had put that source for the research on online teaching best practices. So I want
Yeah.
people to have access to it. So I'll send you the link for the slide deck, and then people will be able to click on the hyperlinks. So you
Okay.
can you can access the video because it's a hyperlink.
Okay. I mean, so yes, so you can either ask a question via the chat, or you can raise your hand, and then you can be unmuted to ask a question or share a thought. I mean, as people are kind of processing it, one of the things that I was thinking, Cynthia, at the end was all these tools are really important, and they're also really important for students to use themselves, right? So like with the Mentimeter, yes, you can set them up and students can answer them. And as you said, you can have an example where you don't have the question and they have to backward construct the question, but also opportunities for students to pose the question, right? And their classmates to answer in the Mentimeter or in Kahoot or whatever it might be. So it's not unilateral or one direction from the teacher to the students, but encouraging the students to use these resources to make their presence found, to make their presence noted, and to be interactive.
Absolutely. Mentimeter actually has a Q&A function where students or participants can actually like ask a question that's overlaid on top of the slide. So like you all saw that you were on a slide and I was actually pacing you all. You could set it up where the students can pace themselves through, but I was pacing you all. And there's actually a Q&A function that can overlay on top of it, as well as a commenting function. Students can actually like comment on whatever it is. So yes, this tool is helpful for what you just said, if that is your goal. One of the things that we cover with our teachers this year is not getting focused on the tool, but make sure you start first with what's your learning goal. How is it that you want them to learn, and what is it that you want them to learn? Then choose your tool. Because if you start with a tool where, like we taught everybody Padlet at the beginning, and we got so many coaching requests for, give me a coaching session on Padlet. I want to use Padlet. But then everything that we saw, the teachers were trying to shove their lesson into Padlet, right? And we have this model where it's, if you have a hammer, then everything becomes a nail, right? But you want to think about, well, what's the purpose? So yes, Mentimeter is great for what you just said. If that was my goal, right? If that's what I wanted to happen. If it's not what I wanted to happen, then maybe I needed to use a different tool. Maybe Jamboard was the right tool, or maybe Padlet was the right tool, or my favorite, which we're going to learn tomorrow, Desmos. I love Desmos.
Okay.
Desmos, like I'm literally getting giddy right now just thinking about Desmos. Right. Desmos is the greatest math tool ever, and it's free. I love Desmos.
All right, and you don't own any stock in Desmos, right? So
no, I don't. It's free. It's completely free. It's like a teacher-led tool. Any other questions? And I appreciate all the feedback in the chat box. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
Yeah, so people have questions or thoughts, I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. I mean, one of the things that I tend to like Padlet for creating a document that's going to hang around for a while, like an FAQ kind of thing, or something that's going to orient ourselves to what are the questions we're going to pursue over the next period of time. And like a Google Jamboard for more like in the moment, interactive, icons, clip art, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, depending upon your goal, you're going to select a different tool.
And I would say for Padlet, for those of you who aren't aware of Padlet, like Eric said, it's a great place. It started out for me as a repository, like you said, a place where I would put resources. In fact, if this wasn't just a keynote, I would have had a Padlet that I gave everybody for you to go get my PowerPoint, for you to access other resources, etc. But one of the things that I started to, as far as like we said today, find the tool and start to grow with it. One of the reasons now that I use Padlet is for that UDL purpose that we were talking about, multiple means of engagement and interaction, because the way that students can respond in Padlet has different ways. They can leave an audio recording, they can leave a video recording, they can do a screencast of what they were doing on their computer screen and leave that as a recording. They can Google image search, they can use timeline feature searches. So just the way that students can interact with my content and the way they can respond to that content, besides just typing in their answer, is one of the reasons that I use Padlet. So if I know that I want to give them multiple ways to respond to my content, I typically am going to go to Padlet because they know that they can record audio, video, visual, images, whatever, and that's how it will upload into Padlet. So that's one of those, like, as a good example, like that transition from the tool was this, but I want to thrive using this tool. How can I make my instruction better using this tool? So
Yeah.
there we go.
One thing I like to do in my ESL classes is, or a couple, like 2 months ago, we were talking about different pronouns like many, some, everybody, no one, you know, that kind of stuff. And so I would pose a question on Zoom and have students answer the question and then share the poll results, and then have my students say, I would say, describe the poll results, right? And they would have to say, well, like everyone seems to think this, or some people seem to think this, right? And so that was a way for me, as you were saying, I'm not telling them what to say, right? But it's an opportunity to use that language, and they have to analyze it and think about, you know, what they want to say. And not everybody has the same ideas, right? So if it's like 40, 20, 20, you know, 40, 20, 20, 10, 10, some people are like, oh, everybody thinks this. And other people are like, what, 40% is not everybody? Like, it's a plurality, but it's not everybody, right? And so then you start to have a conversation about the words and the meaning. So
thank you for that example.
yeah.
Well, it's 2:00 and I'm done. Thank you for the opportunity to give the plenary, and I hope to see those of you tomorrow at the session. I did, for those of you who wanted to like access it now, I did go ahead and drop the link for today's slide deck in the chat box. So if you want to access it now, I just saw the early birds catching the worm, like 4 people already jumped on it.
Yeah.
But I still will email it to you, Eric, and as well as the Padlet that I use for tomorrow's session.
All right. And tomorrow's session is at 11:30.
Yes, tomorrow's session is at 11:30, the one that I'm doing.
In Zoom space. So yes, 11:30 tomorrow in Zoom space. So thank you so much, Cynthia. This was a really, really interesting and I think inspiring way to think about numeracy, and also to get the conference started off on the right foot. So I want to thank you on behalf of NJALL and the state of New Jersey for once again crossing the digital river and sharing your ideas with us.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, take care.